Well, hello friends. Welcome to the SerenityOS update for February 2022. It's been another good month in the project with around 120 people adding around 1,500 commits to the repository. And something that I did this month was I went on the Co-Recursive podcast with Adam Gordon Bell and talked about the history of the SerenityOS project, how it came about, things like that. So if you're interested, I definitely recommend checking it out. I had a great time on the podcast, and I'll put a link to it in the video description. And another cool thing that we did here on YouTube this month was the SerenityOS Community Showcase, where I asked people in the SerenityOS community to send in little videos of what they were working on. And that was just so much fun. And I have a link to that in the video description as well. I definitely recommend checking that out. And we're going to do that again for sure. Anyway, let's jump ahead and take a look around the system and see what's new in February. All right, so we are back in the SerenityOS desktop environment. And the first thing I want to show you today is a new feature in our status bars. So these segments can now have an associated menu that comes up when you click on it. So this guy right here allows you to switch the syntax highlighting mode. So you can switch to C++, for example. And it just also shows the current highlighting type. So switch to HTML or whatever you like. Pretty nifty. And this was implemented by Thank You Very Cool. So thank you very cool. Very cool. Another thing that we can look at in text editor is emoji support in our text rendering system. So we already had emojis for quite a while, but new this month is multi-code point emojis. So stuff like flags where you combine multiple code points to create a single flag. This was implemented by Linus, and then Jecha added a bunch of flags. So thanks to the both of you for improving our emoji support. Now, if I actually go and select and mess around here, you can see that there are some glitches because the whole system is not aware of multi-code point entities just yet, but like everything else, it's a work in progress. So something else that's really cool is Markdown support in the terminal now has some color to it. So if you bring up, for example, a man page, this one is for LS, we now have colors, which, I don't know, it just adds like some flair to it and makes it a bit easier to read, I think. I really like it, and this was implemented by Slendy. Another thing in the terminal that we can look at quickly is we have NC, which is our own version of Netcat. So NC is just a general purpose utility for making TCP and UDP connections, and it also allows you to listen on an arbitrary port, or at least I thought it did. Is it not -L? Oh, maybe I have to say the bind address. Okay, so now I'm bound and listening to 2500, and then I can connect to localhost on 2500 and say hello. And something that's new this month is that our listening mode in NC actually allows multiple connections. So here in another terminal, I will connect to the same part and say other terminal. And the listening thing here picks that up as well. So it's multiplexing connections. And this was implemented by Brandon. And I think that's really cool. So thank you, Brandon. Anyway, a really big thing this month is improved cryptographic support in our browser. So Linus is going to talk a lot more about the browser stuff, but we now have support for ECDHE, which is the elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman ephemeral system. And that's very commonly used on HTTPS servers around the web. So there's been a long-standing issue where you couldn't access many web servers from SerenityOS because we didn't support ECDHE. But now that we do, we can go to places like Wikipedia, and it actually loads and kind of looks usable. Definitely needs some work in the layout department. But just the fact that we can load way more sites now is going to help us improve the browser tremendously. So ECDHE was implemented by Michiel, and the X22519 curve that's required for this was implemented by Stellar 7. So thanks to the both of you for working on that. If we go and look at Hack Studio, for example, so I'll bring that up here for a little test project. We now have this thing called Semantic Highlighting, which is basically right now in the default mode, we are just using a C++ lexer to syntax highlight this document. But if we go and turn on Semantic Highlighting, we now use a full C++ parser and comprehension engine to parse the C++ and give us way better highlighting, and also stuff like jump to declaration, jump to definition, and things like that. And also it gives us better suggestions when you try to autocomplete. So this is new this month, and Itamar has been doing a ton of work on this, and it's actually kind of nice because it uses slightly different colors when you switch the engine on, so you can always tell if you're in that mode. And Itamar has just been continuing to work tirelessly on the C++ engine here, and something else that's pretty neat I saw he did was, let's see, if you have a namespace here, for example, wait, let me switch to semantic highlighting. If you have a namespace, and you can now control click on these, and it takes you to the namespace definition, which is pretty cool. And this is just one of many, many things Itamar has been doing with libcpp, and it just keeps improving, so that's awesome. And I think in Hack Studio also recently, we got this open recent thing here where it shows you recent projects you've had opened, and that was added by Marco, so that's really, really nice, and probably a feature we should bring to the rest of the system, but for now it only exists in Hack Studio. But thank you, Marco, for working on that. Okay, let me show you some other random thing. So we have a hex editor in the system, and you can totally use it to hex edit. Well, I thought you could use it to hex edit etsy password. Let me see. Let me try to hex edit something else then. I will hex edit the README in my home directory. All right. So a new feature in hex editor is that you can now use page up and page down. Although I have to say it's really aggressive. It feels more like home and end. I didn't actually try it out before before starting the video. So it seems like we need to improve the page up, page down feature a little bit more. But regardless, work on page up, page down was started by Liav this month. So thank you, Liav, for expanding into user space outside of, I know you normally work on kernel stuff, so it's great to see you in user space. And that's awesome. And now let's take a look at Pixel Paint. So a new architectural improvement in Pixel Paint this month is this widget here that displays the main canvas of the currently open image. It used to be sort of a custom widget for Pixel Paint, and Mustafa has done all the work to create a more generally usable widget out of this, and it's called the Abstract Zoom Pan widget, because it's an abstract widget where you can zoom and pan. So the name kind of makes sense. And this allows us to use the same widget in other applications, which is really, really sweet. So thank you, Mustafa, for working on that and improving our abstractions. And I think also in Pixel Paint this month, I wanted to show you in the filter gallery, we now have a little preview feature where you can actually see a preview of what would happen if you would apply one of these filters. So I think that's a feature I requested recently, and then Snooze went and built a basic implementation of it. So that's really awesome. We definitely need to do some UI work here, but it's nice to see the features coming in. Anyway, I think now I'm going to pass it over to Linus, who's going to talk a bit about our web stack stuff.
Okay, so most of the changes relating to the browser have been in libweb this month, but we have a couple new things in libjs as well. So let's quickly go over them. So for example, we have the non-standard but widely used error.stack property now, which was implemented by Leon. So thank you for that. Non-standard meaning that there's no formal specification for it, but every major implementation has it. So we do as well. For example, here we call a function foo. Foo calls the function bar, and bar throws a type error. And then we catch that error and console.log e.stack. So let's try that out. And as you can see, so this is simply a string multiline. At the beginning, it contains the error name and then the error message, and then basically where that error was thrown and each stack frame which led to it. And then software like Sentry, which is an open source software for error tracking, can pass that stack frame and show it in a more friendly way, or show like internal sources if it's compiled through a bundler. And something else that's new is bigint.sintn and suintn, which was implemented by Tim. So thank you for that, Tim. Let's do a quick demo. So bigint.s, so you can see we have both functions here. And it allows clamping a certain bigint value into an integer range. So for example, if we take an 8-bit integer, which has a range from minus 128 to 127, and we pass any bigint value, like 1, basically does nothing. But if we pass 127, also does nothing. And if we go 1 above the range, it basically wraps around and goes to the lower end. And if we like pass a massive value, it's still gonna wrap around. So that works both for signed and unsigned integers. And then also we have a whole bunch of internal refactoring and correctness fixes and performance stuff, which I'm not gonna go over in detail, but I want to shout out everyone. So Ali has done some great work on the bytecode interpreter. Andreas, David, Eden, Luke, and Tim have all done performance work, things that impact test262, for example, which has led to another 0.5% increase this month, going now up to over 80%. So that's really cool. And special shout out to David, who has completed our VM exception removal, which basically completes a project that has been ongoing since September last year. So big thank you for finalizing that.
Well, thank you, Linus. So let's look at some more desktop application stuff, starting with File Manager. New this month is we have a much nicer delete animation if you delete a whole bunch of things. So let's make a folder and we can copy something big in here like the JavaScript tests. And we already had this progress dialog when you're copying files, but new this month is we also have one for deleting files. So the thing that you saw speed by there, that was added by Jason, who drew the little recycle bin and everything. So very, very nice to have some visual feedback when you delete stuff in the file manager. Thank you, Jason, for working on that. And then we have, I think, one new desktop theme this month. It's called Groovebox Dark, and added by Jaime, and it's a dark theme. It's kind of nice looking, I guess. Not my personal favorite, but I'm more of a default boy. But for those of you who like dark themes, check out Groovebox Dark. And oh, by the way, we now have this little thing down here, this little Keymap Applet, which shows you the currently active keymap. And this was added by Timur. And if you click it, it just opens up our keyboard settings app. So pretty nice to have that there. At least for those of you who use multiple key maps and you want to switch between them and stuff like that, it's good to be able to see which one is open. We should probably look into being able to turn that off if you only have one key map, but it's a good applet, I think. I might actually use it myself to switch into Swedish sometimes. We'll see. Oh, by the way, speaking of settings windows, let me open up the settings, because in the clock settings this month, Tim has added this sweet map here to show you where your time zone is. So say that I were to switch myself to Europe, Stockholm, which I probably should have been in already, and I apply that, then it now shows that this instance of SerenityOS is running right here, and it's Central European Standard Time. So if you move it around, it will actually move the little thing on the map to show you where you are, which, I don't know, I think that's a really cool feature. It was implemented by Tim, who's been doing all of the time zone support stuff recently. So thank you, Tim, for working on that. And more settings stuff, I guess. A little detail that I find really, really nice and learned something from is the this resolution drop down here now shows you the aspect ratio of the resolutions when you're choosing which one to use. And I don't know, it was just fascinating to see the actual aspect ratios as computed here, because I guess, for example, I have a laptop that's apparently 57:32, bit of an unusual aspect ratio, but thing that actually exists. So I learned that there was a discrepancy between marketing numbers and actual numbers sometimes. Anyway, this was implemented by For Love of Cats, so thank you, For Love of Cats. I also love cats, so very cool name also. Anyway, let's go and look at font editor. So that thing has been getting some love. We have a bunch of people doing a lot of font work recently. Jeja and Brandon are both just churning out more and more glyphs, and still not at the point where I can just scrub this thing up and down and get glyphs, but this new feature here on the side, which shows us the different Unicode blocks, is really, really helpful. And I think this was added by Thank You Very Cool. I know at least Thank You Very Cool did the one in character map, which is right here. And presumably it's the same person who made this one, but you never know. So whoever did this, thank you. That is very cool. And it's really sweet to be able to like go to a Unicode area by just naming it instead of hunting through this huge field of glyphs, right? So if I wanted old Hungarian, then I can get myself there real quick and look at these pretty sick glyphs, honestly. They're really, really cool. Wow, look at these. Badass. Anyway, let's look at something else. So, in Spreadsheet this month, there's been a bit of a burst of interest in Spreadsheet this month. So some people have picked it up and hacked on it, which is always fun. And U9G added a new, more user-friendly range function. I think we used to have this thing where you would do like something like a range of like B1, B6 or whatever. And now there's this R syntax instead, which, oh, I already forget how to use it, but we can just look in the documentation. So Spreadsheet has this really handy thing. You just click on this guy right here, brings up the book, which is full of examples. Yeah, so this is a syntax now for making a range. You just say, let's see, let's actually use one of these things. So let's try out one of these new APIs in the scripting language. So max if, I know this was added by U9G as well, so let's try it out. Let's say that we have 10, 20, and 30, and then here we want to put something. What does this thing do? The largest number within a range that is greater than 4. So say that we wanted to find something. So I guess we say colon max if, and then we say that if it's larger than 10, then it's a match, and then we want to look in the range A0 through C0. Sure. But what if it had to be smaller than 20? Then we get 10 instead. So that works. Of course it works, but it's really cool. I don't play enough with Spreadsheet, but I have to say this new syntax for ranges is way nicer than having to spell out like range as we did before. So super nice work by U9G adding that. And also for the new APIs. I know there are more APIs, but I don't remember which ones here were added. But I think Max at least was new. So, and then I also know that Zach did an undo feature. So let's try to undo here, see what happens. That certainly undid some stuff, although this guy is still here. So kind of interesting. Seems like it didn't, undo didn't remove what I had typed in this field here that had a formula. But it did undo and redo these guys. So seems like this feature needs a little bit of work, but really nice of Zach to start working on undo redo, because like with all of these things, somebody has to start so that we get the ball rolling, and then we can work on it together and improve things incrementally, right? But just that initial burst of energy that somebody puts in to get started, that's so valuable, I think. So thank you, Zach, for working on undo redo. It's a very nice feature. And let's close that. And oh, and this actually brings me to another thing that I know happened this month, which is that Karol went and made Spreadsheet use this system standard dialog for saving unsaved changes when you're trying to close a window. So we used to have like a special thing made just for Spreadsheet, but now it just uses the standard system dialog for that. So that's really cool. And other stuff in the kernel this month, something which is super awesome, but I'm not running right now because of stability reasons. But Tom got SMP working on x86 64. So we now have multi-core support on 64-bit. Previously, we only had multi-core on 32-bit, but now we support multi-core 64-bit systems as well. So super awesome work by Tom getting that up and running. Now we just need to stabilize it, but that is awesome, I think. So it's nice. We started the system as a single core 32-bit system, and now we are, I'm on 64-bit right here, and we're also moving towards 64-bit SMP. So really, really nice. Big thanks to Tom for working on that. And other stuff in the kernel, the AC97 sound driver that we're now using got some nice improvements by Jelle this month to improve the stability and just general capabilities of the driver. And we also got rid of the Sound Blaster 16 driver since it's an ancient card and we really don't need to support it. We are much better off with AC97 and probably some other cards that we will eventually implement, but it's nice to get rid of these like really, really ancient ISA sound card stuff that we had, because, you know, nobody actually wants to use those with the system, hopefully. Other than that, in the kernel, there's just been the continuing story of low memory condition stuff. So Idan has been doing a ton of great work, as he always does, on low memory stuff. So a big milestone this month was Idan got rid of ACK string in the kernel. So that's our oldest string API that we've been using, and it does implicit allocation, which is a big no-no in the kernel world, because we don't have a way to propagate allocation failures if you do that. So we've been moving towards a more failure-friendly API called KString, and now we use KString everywhere. So Idan got rid of the old string, and that's just awesome. I'm really glad that that Idan has been like seeing this through, because it's hard work and a little bit repetitive sometimes, and it's just nice to see that that these things happen, these things get done in the system, even though they can take a long time. Like, we still see them through. So super awesome work by Idan on that. And I guess a final random thing is SerenityOS can now be built on FreeBSD, I think. I saw Isak was working on that, and that's really cool. I don't use FreeBSD myself, but it's really nice if people who are using it can build on it. So thanks everybody who work on like just bringing the system to more platforms. I guess that's really sweet. Anyway, now let's go back to Linus, who wants to talk a bit more about web platform stuff.
Okay, let's have a look at all the browser and libweb changes. So much of this was inspired by Andreas's hacking video series, bringing Discord to life, basically. Not all of it, but I highly recommend that you watch that on YouTube if you haven't already. It's really interesting stuff. So let's have a look. So first of all, some visual changes in the browser itself. So in all of these menus, we have now icons for pretty much every menu entry, which is really nice, because especially when these menus get crowded, like here we have probably 6 or 8 dump something debug menu items, and so Brandon has drawn tiny icons for them, which is really nice. So for example, this cookie here, or some layer tree stuff. So very nice visual changes here. And then we have basic support for web workers. Now they are still in the same thread, so we are kind of cheating here. Web workers, if you don't know, they are basically a way to spawn a separate thread and then run JavaScript in it, because normally everything like event handling and your regular JavaScript stuff all runs on the same thread. But yeah, that was done by Andrew, some initial work, and then Ben, who added the worker function. So if we look at, we have a demo here, I think. Right, workers. So worker test. So if we look at the source code for this, and you can't see the console right now because it's on a different screen. But let's have a look at the source code. So we have worker test here, which loads a new file called worker.js using the worker constructor, and then sets up a message handler, and then adds some event handling to communicate between both this thread and the other worker thread. So that's really, really nice. This was needed by Discord. And then Luke did a bunch of work on the environment settings object, which finally got merged. So that is a internal thing in the web specifications, but it's really important for a bunch of stuff. So it's really good that we finally got that merged after many months of working on it. So thank you, Luke. And he also worked on the range API, some DOM APIs, some IDL implementation stuff. So as usual, lots of work on the browser all around. And then Sam also, as usual, did a whole ton of work on the CSS parser and rendering. So for example, he did multiple shadows. So you already had simple shadows like this and blurred shadows, but now you can mix them and they will all stack on top of each other, which is sometimes used to create more realistic looking shadows on buttons, for example. And he also worked on media queries and CSS calc. So for example, adding some values together for a padding. And he also worked on border radius percentages. So for example, we have a div here and then we make it red, give it a fixed size. And now if we give it a border radius that is 50%, it will look like a circle, which is in fact what this is commonly being used for. Just giving objects a full border radius basically and make them look like a circle. And he also worked on pseudo-elements. So we now have : before, : after, marker, and the content property. So here's a simple test page. So for example, these markers here you can see. Let's bring up the source code. So these markers here you can see are styled, which is done by selecting the, where is it? Right here, li.::marker element. So this is basically selecting the pseudo element that is creating the circle, and then we can style that. For example, give it a color. Or also these sentences here are not actually down in the HTML. So here you can see it's only the middle sentence, and all the other sentences are inserted using the content property. So using before and after, we create pseudo elements and then dynamically set the content of that element to a certain string. So this is really nice and of course widely used across the web. And Sam also did some work on SVG. And then we have finally document.write, which is a still commonly used API, which is a bit strange, but can't get around it. So this was done by Lawrence. And basically what it does is using JavaScript, writing into the document. So we say document.open. And that basically starts a transaction, I would call it. And then we can say document.write. And we just pass any HTML string and the parser is going to pick that up. So for example, h1, well, hello friends. Let's close it. And then once we close that current session or whatever you want to call it, it's going to write into the document. So this is often used to inject scripts after loading, for example. Great work by Lawrence. And Michiel implemented stylable button support. So here's a little demo. So for a long time, our buttons just used the native rendering. So like the one down here, for example, a little erased look. But they weren't stylable using CSS, which is obviously an issue because most websites would override the button style. And now we can do that. So the new default style is a little more flat. Reminds me like of modern Windows buttons. But it's simply a couple of lines of CSS in the default user agent style sheet. And now we can override that. So I have an input type button here. Selecting that, and then we can, for example, apply a background, a color, and a custom padding. So let's see how that looks. So you can see big difference. So now you can style buttons in libweb, which is nice. And then we have support for the image rendering property. So for example, if you have some pixel art image and you scale that up, by default it would look blurred like this. But you can apply a property. I forgot what it's called. Let's have a look at the source. Right, so image rendering pixelated, and then it's just gonna show the image in a pixelated style. So this was added by Maciej, and it works nicely, as you can see. And then Tobias did some work on Svg View Box Support. So I think this solves an issue where SVG images would render all over the page and like not respect their boundaries that were set within the image. So that should be fixed. And then we have support for the progress bar element, which was done by Rafael. So thank you for that. It's using, as you can see here, like a native style progress bar. And we can dynamically change the value of it using JavaScript. So that's really nice. And we can also read the value from it. And finally, Andreas has been all over the place in libjs, in libweb. So as I mentioned, he did a ton of work for Discord this month. Bunch of performance, layout improvements, as also visible in the Asset 2 test, for example, which now has like this little nose that turns blue when you hover over it. And the eyes look better than they used to. And Asset 1 and Asset 3 as well have massively increased. And other stuff like checkbox behavior, firing the correct events, querying the checked state, mouse events, focus of inputs, and also basic local storage, which I can show you. So you have this property on the window object called local storage, which implements like this storage interface. And so we can get item from that, passing a key. So currently it's unset, so it's going to return null. But if we set item, foo set to bar, and then we query that again, it's going to return bar, the string. And so currently that is not serialized to disk, so it's going to disappear when you close the browser, but it's a good step forward. And I think that is all today. Yeah, massive improvements all across the browser. Really great work by everyone. And that's it.
I think that's everything we had to show you today. So thank you so much for checking in and staying up to date with the project. If you want to come chat, do join the SerenityOS Discord server. There is a link to that in the video description. And I also have a weekly live stream here on YouTube. It's every Friday at 4 p.m. Swedish time. It's called SerenityOS Office Hours, and everybody is welcome to ask about SerenityOS and related topics, and we'll just talk about them. Finally, if you would like to sponsor development of SerenityOS, you can find donation options for myself and Linus, and also, as of recently, Sam, in the video description below. I'm working on this full-time since May of the last year myself, thanks to the generous support of many, many awesome people. So thank you all so much for helping me do this. And that's it for today. So see you next time. Bye.